How do you figure out problems where you're asked how much is being saved? Or sometimes you're asked, what is the list price? Well, these problems can be kind of tricky. Something that you really have to make sure you know before you begin is, are you trying to figure out the amount of savings, or are you trying to figure out the price it will be if you take away the discount? Or are you trying to figure out what the regular price was before there was a discount? You need to make sure that you've got that clear in your head before you begin. Now, let's take a look at this type of problem where it says a store is giving a 30% discount on all the items. How much is saved on each item? In this problem, we're trying to figure out the amount of money that is being saved. And we know that it is 30% that is being saved from the regular price. So what we are trying to figure out is, what is 30% of this price? Okay, so what I'm trying to find out is, what is 30% of, in this first example, 35? Well, remember when we talked about multiplying fractions and we said that word of means multiply. So you're doing the same thing here. This is the same thing as 30% times 35. Now we don't normally work with percents in this fashion. Before we can solve this problem, we need to change 30% either into a decimal or into a fraction. It really doesn't matter which you do. It's kind of personal preference. For me, if I am allowed to use a calculator, I always change my percent into a decimal because it's very quick and easy then. 30% is the same as 0.3 as a decimal, so I can just punch that into my calculator, hit the multiplication symbol, times 35, and write a note right away. I know that it equals 10.5. Now that's what it displays on my calculator. So what that tells me is that I'm saving 10.5, but that doesn't seem to make sense, does it? Because we're talking dollars here. So what would 10.5 be as dollars? Right, it would be $10.50. We would need to fill in that extra zero there in the hundredths place. And that's how easy it can be if you're allowed to use your calculator. Okay, just change your percent into a decimal and then multiply. Now, let's say you're not allowed to use your calculator. Okay, when I'm not allowed to use my calculator, then I like to change my percents into a fraction because for me that's just a little bit easier when multiplying. I know that 30% is the same as 30 over 100, or to make it simpler, 3/10. And again, I'm going to multiply. So I'm trying to find out, what is 3/10 of, or times, 35? Well, remember when we're multiplying with fractions, we need to have a fraction on both parts. So I'm going to take my 3/10 and I'm going to multiply it by 35 as a fraction. So I'm just going to put 35 over 1. Okay, remember that's how we can take a whole number, change it into a fraction, and multiply. So now I just multiply my numerators. 3 times 35, and I get 105. And then I multiply my denominators, 10 times 1, and I get 10. Okay, so I get 105 over 10. And I just need to simplify. Or I can even think of that as a division problem. 105 divided by 10. I'm moving that decimal point in 1. And I'm going to once again get 10.5. Okay, so whether you can use a calculator and change your percent into a decimal, or not use a calculator and change your percent into a fraction, that's how we can figure out the amount of savings in these problems. However, what if we need to figure out the list price? We know the sale price, but we don't know how much it cost originally. Okay? These are somewhat trickier. Again, I have to ask myself, okay, so what am I trying to be figuring out here? Well, if I think about the problem that I just did, to find the sale price, I did some percent of the regular price equaled the sale price. But here I know the sale price. So I'm thinking, okay, let's take our second one for an example here. 50% of something equals 100 or $100. Okay, 50% of something equals $100. That's like saying 50% times something equals 100, right? And if I think of 50% in either a decimal or a fraction, I'm thinking as a decimal, 0.5 times something equals 100. If you think about all your fact families, okay, think about all the different ways you can write the same thing in the different fact families, okay? I can write 0.5 times n equals 100. I can write n times 0.5 equals 100. Or I can write 100 divided by n equals 0.5, or 100 divided by 0.5 equals n. Oh, and that's the one that's going to help me get the answer that I'm looking for, because my answer here is the number I'm trying to figure out. So in order to find it, I have to do 100 divided by 0.5. And since I used a decimal here, I'm assuming that I can use a calculator. So if I do 100 divided by 0.5, my n equals 200. And that tells me that my list price, or my starting price, was $200. Now I can do the same thing by changing that 50% into fraction, 50/100ths or 5/10ths. Okay, and work it without a calculator. Now you'll see in this example they were asking me to estimate it first. You want to make sure you do that. I didn't do that in this video just for the purpose of keeping it more brief. Okay, so